So continuing our coverage at Netroots Nation 2019, I'm here with Alexandra Rojas. She is the Executive Director of Justice Democrats. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Sam.
All right, so I think by now my audience has a pretty good sense of what the Justice Democrats are, but give us the sort of the elevator pitch for those who might not.
Absolutely. I think we're trying to transform the Democratic Party to actually fight for its voters and not just corporate donors. For us, that means engaging in competitive primary elections to recruit a new generation of leadership and build a mission-driven team of Justice Democrats in the House that are actually going to present solutions as big as the problems that we're facing that match the scale, scope, and urgency of them. And I think that we can see we acknowledge that the same leadership that has sort of gotten us into this mess aren't going to be the ones to get us out of it. And so we're trying to merge, I think, electoral organizing with social movement building. And you can see the sort of case study of that work with candidates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez being able to, once elected, team up with organizations like us in Sunrise to push issues like a Green New Deal into the national conversation.
And in the last election, I think there was 65 candidates that got the...
over 70.
Over 70, who got the endorsement from Justice Democrats. In the end, not a huge number of those won their elections, but obviously some fairly prominent wins. You mentioned AOC, and I think most people accept the premise that to the extent that there's any energy left in the Democratic Party, it's coming out of folks like AOC. All right, so we need to talk about. I want to get into sort of more theory of change questions in a bit, but let's just deal with what's sort of right in the front burner. I think is this. There's a lot of friction right now within the Democratic caucus, and Nancy Pelosi seems to have a strategy. Do you have a sense of what that strategy is?
No, I don't. I think that wielding power for the sake of power and not using it to do the most benefit for the people of the America, and you're putting politics before it, doesn't make sense to have it in the first place. And so I think that, for us, the strategy that we feel is the one that is exciting to voters is by going straight to them, carrying our message straight to them, and that's presenting solutions that are actually matching the problems that are facing them every day. And so I hope Nancy Pelosi chooses to do that and focus on defeating Donald Trump and not singling out 4 members of Congress versus the Problem Solvers Caucus, which I think is causing her more trouble.
I mean, but do you even from even from her perspective, do you see when I think they should start with impeachment hearings, but I can understand the sort of theory behind why you wouldn't. But I honestly can't, even based upon what her objectives are, understand what's going on. Do you
I would
guys
agree.
have better-
No, I don't understand. Like I said, I don't understand it. I think leadership is operating from a place of courage and from strength, and not just being afraid of what the Republicans are going to say or how politically it's going to do. I think at the end of the day, we have to do what's right for the American people and uphold, at least for members of Congress, have to uphold their constitutional responsibility to hold the president accountable.
Okay, so give me a sense of what, Justice Democrats, presumably, the strategy is going to be an extension of what it was last time. You're going to go out and you're going to primary Democrats who are what? When you sit on, presumably in some office with a big board, what are the criteria in which you start to look at what races you're going to look at?
Well, the first thing I will say is that we're not in this to be against anybody. We're in this to elect champions of the issues that we care about. So first off, I think, what we're trying to do is something positive, which is transform, I think, the direction of this country to speed up the timescale that we need to tackle issues like climate change. But I think the way that we look at districts is part art, part science. That art part is what I just spoke to, which is that we're electing champions. And we believe that the foundation of our process that rests on a nomination form is because we need a Congress that's not majority white, that's not majority wealthy, and that reflects the diversity, not just of ethnicity, but of background of the American people, right? We have 330 million bright and amazing people that make up the most advanced society, economy, all of that stuff, right? that means that we can diversify Congress beyond just attorneys and wealthy people. The science part, to get to your point, is where we look at, I think, positions within the Democratic Party. How long have they gone unchallenged? What are the demographic makeups of the district, both in terms of, the makeup of the community there, but also, is it urban, is it rural? Is that going to inform our field program? What is the ideological record of the incumbent? Someone like Henry Cuellar is going to go to the top of the list, right? But if we had done that for just Joe Crowley, he wouldn't have, right? But he's the fourth most powerful Democrat in the House, someone that when you talk to the people there has been absent, hadn't been challenged in a long time, and took a ton of corporate and Wall Street money. And so I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is bring out the best in Democrats. We personally believe that no incumbent is beholden to their seat. We only have so many resources, so this cycle we're going to focus on 20 to 25, with the majority being against incumbent Democrats that we feel deserve to be challenged.
So, okay, so when you're making those calculations, the primary factor is going to be the behavior of those incumbents, and then if there's a couple of stars in a marginal seat, then you go with the marginal. Then those are the ones.
I would flip it. I would say the number one thing is that we want to elect champions. So even if it's a district that seems really difficult, like AOC's, we're going to do it anyway because we need to support progressive, grassroots, insurgent challengers if we want to transform the party, not just from a win-lose perspective, but also to advance the issues that we care about. And we can see that just over the past 2 to 3 years, right, single payer is now asked at the presidential debate to be asked. So I think either way, that's important. That's number one. I think number two is making sure that we have that we replace incumbents that are deeply out of touch with democratic values, like Dan Lipinski, Henry Cuellar, or those that aren't that are accepting corporate money and ruled by special interests.
So I asked Sean McElwee this question. I know the Data for Progress, you guys do a lot of work together. What is the number, do you think, that progressives need to get to in the caucus to where they have the ability to sort of to basically take the problem solvers and sideline them? What's the critical mass? Do you have a sense of that, or is it we'll know it when we get there?
So I'm also a co-founder of Brand New Congress. So I literally used to think we're going to repeal and replace and run 400 candidates. So I definitely used to think that we needed hundreds of Justice Democrats in there. But I think the reality is that we can see that it doesn't take that many to really expand not just the national conversation, but I think momentum for our movement, right, to continue to power it. Because, at the end of the day, these issues are really urgent, but we're going to have to build over time, to your point, right? So I think that where I used to think it was, hundreds of Justice Democrats, I think if we build a caucus of 20 to 30 and we wield and they are putting their political ambitions to the side and they are focusing on what's right for the American people, even when it's uncomfortable, I think that we can see that the rest of the caucus will sign on. And you can see that with, Green New Deal on day one had over 80 co-sponsors. And when you look at the co-sponsorships, a lot of them are afraid of getting primary challenged. So I think that it's a number of strategies that we have to use to really pressure incumbents. But one of the best ways that we've seen to be able to do that and already have an impact is by just challenging them.
Yeah, McElwee also added, and I have to say, it stuck with me because in all my time discussing the value of challenging incumbents, I hadn't really quite contemplated the idea of even challenging those who may not be in that column of a Cuellar, but to empower them to go to Nancy Pelosi and say, look, I'm going to get challenged here, so I need to do X, Y, and Z. Nadler, for instance, I need to subpoena, or I need to issue, to get more information or something like that. Yeah. I mean, when you guys are looking at this stuff, to what extent do you look at maybe looking at different districts around, putting aside for the moment as to what Democrats are not necessarily on board programmatically, but is there a second sort of look at things where you look at if we had this type of geographic distribution of Justice Democrats, or if we had this type of demographic representation of certain demographic, Waukesha County, let's say. Like, do you contemplate that notion of there is a potential strategy that involves very specific districts around the country that would leverage a speaker or a majority leader more so than others? Or is that just overthinking things?
No, that's not overthinking it. I think that's exactly what we're doing. I think that we have to apply pressure and build power. And I think, in absent of being able to win hundreds of congressional seats, I think one of the only ways is by being able to choose races at this time, right? I think last time we had a little bit of a shotgun method where we endorsed over 70. And we did that because we wanted to back progressive challengers and show that it doesn't matter if you're running in Texas, the Democratic Party shouldn't be forgetting about you. And if we want to, actually build power long term, it can't just be a transactional relationship with the community and thinking about, win and lose. You have to make multi-cycle investments to see change, right? But I think this time where we have, a $16.17 average contribution, I want to make sure that we're using our resources as strategically for the movement, but obviously to build power as possible. And I think one of the best ways to do that is by that part art, part science method, where we're building a narrative in a race, we're finding and recruiting candidates that are reflective of the communities that they're serving, and we're making sure that they are going to run unapologetically because they champion these issues. There's an intuitive, their life experience is why they support these policies. And I think the people that we're going to be challenging, like Henry Cuellar, like Dan Lipinski, and the ones to come, are going to be that mix of champion, and also because those particular incumbents are halting progressive priorities, and if we want to pass legislation at the end of the day, they need to go.
What have there been instances where you have over the past year and a half, I guess, maybe since following the 2018 election, where you thought to yourself, wow, they're afraid of us, and who would that be? To the extent, I mean, have there been moments where you sort of became conscious of okay, now we're not necessarily that you need outside validation to say that you're legit, but that you got a sense of this is how we're being perceived in the context of the establishment, let's say?
Well, I will say, and I'm really proud that we do not have an inside game beyond getting the champions that we have in there and making sure that they are, have the support and doing the good work that they do. Our power does not come from DC insiders and the establishment, so that's first off. But I will say that, I don't think anyone was expecting Jessica Cisneros to raise $150,000 in 48 hours.
Right.
And I think that people are taking this race seriously, establishment and not establishment. And I think even people within the sort of party establishment are exactly what's happening right now on the national stage with Pelosi attacking these 4 women of color who are championing what their constituents want, are really disappointed in that. They're not just sort of Bernie bros like myself. They are people that have been in the party for a long time that are disappointed with the leadership and the direction that this country is going. Because we got Donald Trump, right? For whatever reason, we couldn't stop him as a Democratic Party. 2016 was when I got politically activated, and I feel like it's my responsibility to try and do something about it and really believe that the same leadership that got us here isn't going to be the ones that get us out.
You weren't involved in politics at all before 2016?
I was a full-time student and full-time in the workforce. And that's why I think primary challenges are so important, because my entryway into politics was during a presidential primary. Bernie Sanders, I couldn't afford to go to college like I had planned to when I moved out to California. I'm originally from Connecticut. But I, heard this crazy old white guy from Vermont talking about these big solutions, and that, we needed millions of people to step up and demand change if we're going to do something. And I think that's powerful. And there were tons of other young women of color like myself that stepped up. And we're not going away, even as much as Pelosi wants to push us out.
Why do you think that, maybe this is outside your portfolio, but why do you think...
just a heads up, I got to go soon.
Sure. Well, why do you think your generation has been able to be more effective, let's say, than my generation in churning things a little bit in the Democratic Party?
I don't know know if it's a question of effectiveness, because when we look back at some of the biggest social movements of our past, which is our North Star, right? We look at, we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? That it's always been young people. The founding of this country, you know, as much as, you know, they probably wouldn't have liked people like me, we're young people.
Right.
And so, you know, if we're going to sort of continue to pass the baton, I think that, you know, my generation is going to be the first that's worse off than their parents. I'm questioning whether or not I can have kids because in 10 years are we going to have a planet to live on? I grew up during the 2008 financial crisis and watching my parents struggle. I couldn't afford to go to college, and that's why I'm sitting here and had to create a full-time job for myself. So I think when you hear people like Joe Biden, for example, say, "Oh, millennials, you know, they're so privileged." He said that before. It's really hurtful. And when you see, you know, the leadership of the Democratic Party, like Nancy Pelosi, slighting the youngest woman ever elected to Congress, some of the first 2 Muslim women ever elected to Congress. When millions of young people really feel a sense of urgency, not from a privileged place, but because we can't afford to do the things that we want to do, it's a privileged position for the Democratic Party to face. So I don't know if that means that we've got a big fight ahead of us, but I think for me it's hard to see beyond the next 2 years of what's going to happen if we don't do something in 2020 to defeat Donald Trump and actually elect a Democrat that's going to go big and going to do what's scientifically mandated that needs to be done, you know, to deal with climate change and implement something like a Green New Deal, because we've done it before. That's the crazy part, right?
Right.
We've done this before, and we got to go back to our roots.
If someone wants to give $16 or $17,
JusticeDemocrats.com.
JusticeDemocrats.com. Alexandra Rojas, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank
really
you so
appreciate
much.
it.